Employment contracts are legally required for you to provide to your employees on or before the first day of employment, but what actually needs to go into them? We're going to break it down now. So you have to have the employer's name, number one. You need to have the employees or the worker's name. You need to include the start date or the date that they are due to start work. So not the date that you think this contract should start from, it's their first day of work. You need to include the continuous employment date. So this is the date that the contract takes effect. So this would include, or you would include the continuous employment date if you are issuing a contract to someone who's already started working for you and you're changing the contract and issuing some new terms. You need to include the job title and a small description of the job, or you can refer to a job description and attach it at the back. You need to include the employer's address, the places or addresses where the employee or worker will work, their pay. Now, the pay clause needs to include how much, how often, when they're going to get paid, and how they're going to get paid. So, for example, £10 an hour paid on the last Friday of every month by bank transfer. You need to include the working hours, including the days on which they're expected to work, and whether or not their hours may change. You need to include holiday entitlement and holiday pay, including an explanation of how it's calculated if the employee or worker leaves your employment. You also need to include things like whether or not they're entitled to average holiday pay. So if their hours or pay are likely to vary, you're probably going to need to pay average holiday pay. You're going to also have to include in your holiday section how they should request holiday, what notice they need to give you to request holiday, and whether or not you enforce holiday at any point. So if you shut down at Christmas, it's important you put that in the contract. You also need to include the amount of sick leave and sick pay they're entitled to. So if it's statutory sick pay only, that's fine. You still need to include that in your contract. You also need to reference any other paid leave. So this is maternity, paternity, adoption, parental, shared parental, dependence leave, neonatal leave, carers leave. I think that's all of them. But any other statutory paid leaves that employee may be entitled to, even if it's statutory pay only, you need to talk about it in the contract. You also need to include any contractual benefits. So private health insurance, any other sort of like medical benefit, death in service, any director's insurance potentially, any other benefits, bonuses, commissions, company cars, car allowances, anything else that you are offering that employee in terms of a benefit. You also need to talk about benefits even if they are non-contractual. So even if it's a case of we operate a discretionary bonus scheme that you may or may not get dependent on what happens, write it into your contract. You also should write about your notice periods. So the notice period that the employee has to give you if they want to leave, and the notice that you have to give the employee or the worker if you want to dismiss them. Now you need to make sure that any notice periods that you ask for or give are in line with statutory requirements. You should also talk about how long the job is expected to last. So is it a permanent role or is it fixed term? And if it's fixed term, so if it's an apprenticeship or if it's a temporary role, you need to put an end date in there and when you're expecting it to end and what you're going to do if you want to keep that employee on, or how much notice you're going to give them if you're going to say, actually, we are just going to end this contract on the specified date. You also need to put a probationary period clause in, which is exceptionally important going into the ERA changes. So from the 1st of July, although the ERA change to probationary periods isn't coming into force until January 2027, it's going to impact employees that you hire from the 1st of July 2026. So having a probationary period in there, I would recommend a 6-month probationary period. Very, very important. You also need to specify if the employee is going to work abroad and any terms that apply to that. And you need to include any training that must be completed by the employee or worker, including any training that you're not going to pay for. So, I can't think of anything specific, but they're the things that as an absolute baseline minimum have to be included in your employment contracts. There are other things that you should include, such as pensions, any collective agreements or terms and conditions that you've agreed with trade unions, any disciplinary rules and grievance procedures, and also anything else relating to their employment. So if there's anything else that you want to make really crystal clear that this applies to you, how to submit expenses. You might have employees who are, like, you might be in an industry where you're governed by safeguarding rules and they have to have a DBS check to be able to work for you. All of that sort of stuff needs to go into your contract. But as an absolute baseline minimum, all the other things I've talked about are what you need. The thing that I can't stress enough is to not rely on AI to draft your employment contracts for you, because they don't know your business inside out or what clauses should or shouldn't be in there. I would highly recommend getting a template from a HR business or a law firm that does employment law, or speaking to a HR consultancy to get them to draft it for you.